Hey, good evening. Welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, kind of a late night meandering, really, but I just saw a comment that was in the form of a question. So I thought I'd read this one too. So, talking about the expression body language of Filipinos and Filipinos, right, in general. So it says the one that I got, this was Daniel, said the one that I got was during an argument. She said, "Get over it." No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Sorry, this is by that guy. It says, "Terence, here is a relationship question for you that I would love to see you answer. It seems that Filipinos are very touch-oriented. When I see Beth and you together, it seems like she is virtually always touching you affectionately. Is this typical in the Philippines? It's extremely appealing." Yeah, well, it is appealing, isn't it? Between two people who are married, isn't that how it's supposed to be? That you should constantly re-establish touch. Here's an interesting thing about touch. I remember reading a long time ago about how the effect of touch establishes a different kind of rapport between people. Now, for some people, they can't stand to be touched. I've spoken to people like this. You know, that if they get touched, you know, they're like this. Don't touch me. You know, but in general, it seems to be a way that the actual physical contact, in ways which are acceptable to that culture. Okay, I read about the culture of the Philippines, and one of the comments that was made in the book that I read was that the acceptable touch between people who don't know each other, like for me, to any of the people that I interact with, you know, the people that we help. Just because you're helping someone, just because you're even building a house, doesn't mean that you're automatically able to touch them the same as you would your mom back at home. You know, it's just not the same. The book said that the always acceptable physical touch between people is to the elbow. So if you were to, say, cross the road with someone that you don't know, a gesture of respect and caring would be the elbow, to take the elbow. For myself, that when I've been found to be saying goodbye to someone, to saying hello, it's a "how are you" touch, a touch to the shoulder, very lightly, a touch to the shoulder, that you touch someone to the shoulder and say "how are you," and that usually is acceptable. This is what I've found, and if it's man to man, you know, a slight slap on the shoulder is okay. But this is what I find. Now, but to the question, is this typical of Filipinos? I think it's typical of Filipinos in certain areas. Now, my extended family now is Beth's family, and I don't find that touch is it's not common between everybody. In fact, I was rather astonished by this, and one day had what you might call an embarrassment session with Timio's family, Pastor Timio. Now, Pastor Timio, you would expect that he would be very expressive on saying "I love you." To me, the most important phrase between people who are close is to say "I love you." Now, in the US especially, I've always found that in the US they tend to be way out ahead. They actually do pioneer lots of changes within society generally. we talked about this before, how I think it was the Americans that created the 10-minute dating, where you meet someone and you have your very important questions, which are key to having a relationship with someone, and you can ask them 10 minutes and you're not emotionally involved there, so there's not really so much offence, except of course if one person was immediately chemistry-wise attracted to the other person, and the other person was very matter-of-fact and said, "Oh, do you know this, do you know that, do you know that, all right, forget it, no good." That would be offensive, yes. But in the US and in California especially, they would have infomercials, not infomercials, but educational little social interaction suggestions, like, "Have you hugged your kid today?" You know, so, you know, have you thought to actually hug your kid? And when I first came to this family, I didn't find that it didn't seem to me that there was any physical touch, and I assume that this is in the hilltop community. There's no question, I am part of an extended family now of hilltop farmers, extremely matter-of-fact, laconic, economical with words. They're not hugely talkers in some ways. I've known my brother-in-law, Manarado. We don't speak English, but that isn't always a decider. Someone can speak very little English and yet be very vocal. So, but with Manarado, he's not a great talker. So I've known him for close on 5 years, never had a conversation with him. So, but I can say thank you, I can say his name. I was always taught, when I was learning, I was in sales instructions, sales tutorials. I was told that the name of a person is the sweetest sound. The sweetest sound to any person is their name. And that's why it's so important when you meet someone to actually use the name. You're important because it helps you to remember the name. And the next time you meet, if you're able to say, "Hello Jeffrey, hello Doris," if you're able to say the name, it's hugely important. Something that I need to take heed of as a lesson myself. But anyway, as I was saying, when I first came, I didn't notice anybody telling anybody that they love them. And I said to Beth and I are always telling each other that we love each other. You know, I mean, I lose count of the number of times a day that Beth says to me, "Hon, I love you." And the same for me. It just is a constant reaffirmation all the time of your commitment to that person. And touch is even more. So when you know, if you're married and it's a good marriage, and if not, if you're trying to make it a good marriage, you know, the act of touching is very important. As I was about to say about the research that I saw, that they were talking about when this is in the old days, certainly in the UK, when a telephone box was a closed thing and there were no cell phones, so people were in line outside the telephone box waiting to use the telephone. And if the person inside walked out of the telephone box and left it and opened the door, that would be one thing. If he came out and touched the person lightly on the shoulder and said, "It's all yours," then that would be another thing. Now here's the difference. For the person, if they tried this on as an experiment, they left something in the telephone box. Now, if when that person came out, and let the next person in if he touched him on the shoulder and said, "Oh, it's all yours, sir," or "It's all yours, ma'am." You know, very lightly and respectfully on the shoulder. Now, always the person who then entered the box would see what was left and call after the person that was leaving. "You left this." Not always if they didn't do the physical contact. And I remember learning from a friend who was a waitress, who was very sensitive to this, and she used to see, especially in Florida, she used to serve people who were sitting alone and were elderly, and you can kind of put the story together, can't you? A very elderly lady sitting alone is probably a widow. She's probably been left alone by someone that she's, in the old days, she would have spent her life with that one person, and now she's alone, and now she's sitting alone. My friend would always touch the lady on the shoulder and say, "How are you today? How can I help you? What are we going to eat today?" She would always do that, and it would always be a magical introduction. Sorry, I got lots of mosquitoes around tonight. And it would always be evident that it was important to that person that she touched a physical contact with another person. And chances are that that old lady was never touched. That's why, well, when I first came to the Philippines, and I was living outside Angeles, and the father, who was like the grandfather, an elderly person, I should talk, but his granddaughters he used to come and visit, and he would sit there, and his two granddaughters would come in, and they would both sit on his knee, and they would hug him. And it obviously was most important to him, and it was an important point in his life. It was a great joy to him to spend a little time with his granddaughters, and that they would hug him and show him that they loved him. I don't see that here, even though if I talk to anyone and say, like I say to Talik, do you love your mother? Yes. Do you say to your mother, "I love you, mother"? And then she does this. This is her embarrassment expression. I say, "Now, the next time you see your mother, why don't you go in, and if you can't do it face to face, go behind her, and put your arms around her, and say, 'I love you.'" Now, when Beth, and how simple it is if this is how you are brought up. When Beth and I went to Cebu recently, this is just days ago, there was a little boy sitting between me and his mother. So he was there, and he was very friendly, open little guy. And I reached into my bag, and I had some candies, and I got the candy out, and I looked at the father, and I said, in other words, I mimed, "Is this okay?" And I gave the candy to the father, and the father gave the candy to the little boy. And he looked up and he said, "Thank you." And I had my hand on the bench next to me, and he put his hand on mine. Now later when he was outside, it's very simple. These are very simple boats, by the way, so the pathway on the other side of the bench, the back of the bench, is the gangplank out, or the gangway outside. And he came up later and he put his arms around my neck like this, from behind, like I was suggesting to tell it. He put his arms around me like this. And his mother came in, back into the boat just at that moment, and it was a totally natural thing for her because she just laughed. That's how important it can be. That's how easy it should be. Well, when we were talking once, I asked Beth, when I first met her, and having told you that this is something that we say to each other all the time, I said, Beth, do you tell your mother that you love her? No. So why not? Well, she knows. Do you tell her? Have you ever said, I love you, Mother, I love you, Nanai? No. Now, I still don't really know if she has even now. But with Talik and Bibi, I say to Bibi, I love you, Bibi, and she says, I love you too, Daddy Terence. And I love you too comes easily to her. So evidently, when she's at home with her mother is expressive to her too, because it seems to come naturally to Bibi. With Talik, I tell Talik I love her. She has said, I love you too, freely, without me doing the guilt trip on her, once, in how many years? 5 years. I don't think that anybody had ever told her that she was loved. I asked her, do you tell your mother? No. Does your mother say to you, I love you, Talik? No. And I will say to her, do you know I love you, Talik? And she'll say, yes. I say, how do you know? You tell me. Well, do you like to be told that? Yes. Well, how do I know? But it's a lost guilt trip, wasted on her completely. So, when we were round at Pastor Timio's, I said to, I think it was Lovely May, Lovely May, do you, I'm terrible at embarrassing people sometimes. Lovely May, do you tell your mother I love you? No. So, you never say I love you? And she says, no. So then I said to the mother, do you tell your daughter I love you? And I said to Pastor Timio, do you tell your daughter that you love her? And it evidently is embarrassing. I said, do you tell your son? I said to the mother, do you tell your son you love him? No. How do you... Why? Well, he knows. And I asked the son, do you tell your mother you love her? Why not? Well... And then comes the Filipino silent thing of not saying it. So evidently, in certain stratas of society, in answer to your question, it's not natural all the time. And yet, when I pointed out, if Beth is watching, if she's watching a movie, and they're very demonstrative on the movies of whenever daughter meets mother, go straight up and hug, and it just seems an automatic thing. It's not automatic everywhere, and that always seems to be a shame to me. Should be able to say I love you. Doesn't that seem to be something that should be a basic necessity? So that's what I see as being the answer to the question. Not everywhere. Now, if you've watched other videos, you will have seen what we always called the three little girls. Now, it's not three little girls. For one thing, it's four little girls at that particular family, and that was the mother that, when she had the boy, she had a boy very well a year ago now. God, it seems recently. It was a year ago, and I am that little boy's godfather. Actually, we're close to that family, and they adore that mother, and it's as if they're welded to them. You know, that usual thing of the child with the arms around the legs of the mother or the father. And that's how it is with those kids. Those girls demonstrate that they love, maybe not telling the mother, but certainly they're very, very close. So it depends. Maybe it depends not so much on whether someone is from the hilltop farming community to the lower land community. Maybe it's not so much that. Maybe it's a family to family thing, and that some people are more able to express those words than others. As for me, my mother never ever told me that she loves me, and my father either. I never told them, and it was only years and years later that I realized that while I was thinking that they never told me that, I realized that I never told them. And it's an important lesson in a way, isn't it? Because later you may have these conversations yourself about people that have passed on that you never actually said, "I love you." And yet you would give anything, as I would now, I would give anything to have even 5 minutes, even that one sentence to those people that have gone before me, my sister, my brother, and my mother and father. I would give anything to be given that one little time warp moment where I could say, "Mom, I love you," and I'll never get it, and I'll have this conversation over and over with my mother, and it will never land, or maybe it does, but in a different way. The lesson to learn is, for those people in your life now, that moment is now. So that moment, that if you allow it to pass and don't express those three words, is happening now. Later, if they're gone, you will have this conversation that I have now with my mother, father, sister, brother, and we'll never be able to land that conversational moment on them. I'll never be able to get them to hear that, unless it's just spiritually. But if you have someone in your life now, and you would hate them to pass without having told them that you love them, that moment is now. So, do it. Talik, tell your mother. Bibi says, "Yes, I do." I said, "Did you tell your mother you love her?" She said, "Yes, I did." Talik said, "No, she didn't." But that's another story, isn't it? Child to child. Thanks for listening. This is A Foreigner in the Philippines.